Council housing has played a crucial role in providing affordable homes for millions of people in the United Kingdom. The history of council housing can be traced back to the post-war period when the country faced an acute housing shortage. Let's explore how the government responded to this crisis and the various initiatives taken to address the population's housing needs. Britain's cities began to expand on a large scale during the 19th century, mainly due to workers and labourers from the surrounding countryside flocking to the city looking for work during the years of industrialisation and growing employment opportunities. House building at this time was primarily done by profit-seeking private builders. Typically, houses could just be 2 rooms, one up, one down. Water was from a communal cast-iron pump with outdoor lavatories. The large majority of the population rented privately, from a modest room in a house to a grand residence in the country, mainly because borrowing and mortgages had not become commonplace. Only the richest people could afford to own their own homes. Problems of poor housing conditions, mostly in inner-city areas, grew steadily as city populations increased. With the development of high-density, unorganized neighborhoods, overcrowding became commonplace. In the poorer areas of cities, families could be found huddled in dark and unsanitary courts of squalid housing, often without facilities and natural light. Concerns began to grow across the country about public health. Arguably, this was stimulated by a fear among the middle classes of infectious disease spreading from the overcrowded and unsanitary working-class housing into where they lived. There was pressure on the government to begin looking at housing issues, and they were slowly persuaded to intervene. In 1890, the Housing of the Working Classes Act encouraged local authorities to improve housing. 3 years after the Act, the London County Council built the first council estate, Boundary Street, on the Shoreditch and Bethnal Green border in East London. Another early housing scheme was the Millbank Estate in Westminster, completed in 1902. The estate provided affordable rented flats for 4,430 people on a site that had previously been the notorious Millbank Prison. Most pre-1919 corporation housing, aka council housing, was built cheaply, taking the form of high-density tenement blocks of flats with small rooms and limited facilities, including shared kitchens and toilets and no running hot water. Typical rents were high, which was no comfort to those on low and irregular wages, and thus did not provide housing for the very poor. One reason for the high rents was that before 1919, no corporation dwellings received subsidy from central government. It wasn't until after the First World War that housing became an absolute priority. Everything changed after the war. As the country fought, building activity came to a virtual halt. By the time of the 1918 general election, it was becoming evident that the country faced a housing shortage. Inflated construction costs and a lack of materials and labour made it impossible for private developers to offer working-class families affordable houses. With the end of the war, a new social attitude emerged that focused attention on the government's responsibility to provide homes. Prime Minister David Lloyd George spoke in Wolverhampton on the 24th of November 1918. As a result of the armistice 2 weeks earlier, he was regarded as the man who won the war. Yet, he said, "The work is not yet done, the work of the nation, the work of the people, and the work of those who have sacrificed. Let us work together first." He continued, "What is our task? To make Britain a fit country for heroes to live in. I am not using the word heroes in any spirit of boastfulness, but in the spirit of humble recognition of fact. I cannot think what these men have gone through. I have been there at the door of the furnace and witnessed it, but that is not being in it, and I saw them march into the furnace. There are millions of men who will come back. Let us make this a land fit for such men to live in. There is no time to lose. I want us to take advantage of this new spirit. Don't let us waste this victory merely in ringing joy bells. The Housing and Town Planning Act of 1919, also named the Addison Act, after the housing minister Dr. Christopher Addison, who crafted the act, marked a turning point in the provision of council housing. For the first time, councils were compelled to assess their local housing needs and build homes for the working class. Housing committees were established, guided by recommendations from the central government's advisory committee, the Tudor-Walters Committee. Due to high post-war construction costs, generous subsidies were provided to encourage councils to build affordable housing. Under the subsidy arrangements, the tenants, local ratepayers, and the Treasury shared the costs of constructing new housing. Areas with high housing needs were eligible to apply for these subsidies. The London County Council, for example, raised funds through the sale of housing bonds, attracting investors with a promised 6% return. This financial support enabled the construction of numerous council housing projects throughout the 1920s. Planners of council housing focused on creating new suburban garden estates on the outskirts of cities. These estates aimed to provide self-contained communities with low population density. Each acre of land typically accommodated no more than 12 houses, ensuring spaciousness and a sense of community. The design of these estates primarily consisted of 3-bedroom houses for families, complete with gardens to encourage residents to cultivate their own vegetables. These estates were equipped with essential facilities such as churches, schools, and shops. Notably, public houses were initially excluded from the plans. The interiors of the houses varied, with some featuring a parlour, while all included a scullery and bath. For many tenants, these new homes represented a significant improvement from their previous overcrowded and unsanitary living conditions in slums. One of the most remarkable council housing projects of the time was the Beacon Tree Estate in Dagenham. Initiated by the London County Council in 1921, it eventually became the largest council housing estate in the world. The estate encompassed over 25,000 houses and accommodated more than 100,000 people by 1932. The houses on the Beacon Tree Estate boasted modern amenities such as gas and electricity, inside toilets, fitted baths, and front and back gardens. However, the London County Council imposed strict rules on tenants regarding housework, maintenance, children's behaviour, and pet ownership. The estate expanded across the Essex parishes of Barking, Dagenham, and Ilford, creating a thriving new town with homes for over 30,000 families. While council estates like Beacon Tree provided quality housing for the better-off working classes, they did not fully address the needs of the poorest members of society. High rents and restrictions on subletting meant that only those in a more favourable financial position could afford these homes. Consequently, unskilled workers and individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds faced difficulty securing council housing. Initially, the Addison Act was intended as a temporary measure to address the housing shortage caused by the war. It was expected that the private sector would eventually resume its responsibility for providing housing for the working class once the British economy had recovered. However, the success and popularity of council housing led to its continued expansion and establishing a long-lasting institution. With the outbreak of World War II, house building effectively stopped. After the war, Britain faced its worst housing shortage of the 20th century. Thousands of houses had been destroyed, and many more were severely damaged by heavy bombing across the country. As a result of the destruction across many British cities, the Housing Temporary Accommodation Act of 1944 was passed. It was estimated that 750,000 new homes were needed in England and Wales to accommodate all families. Based on themes developed before 1939, an extensive building program was planned. In 1945, a Labour government was elected, and housing policy became a central focus of their welfare reforms. Aneurin Bevan, the Minister of Health, was tasked with implementing a housing programme prioritising local authority involvement rather than relying on the private sector. Bevan was also responsible for the creation of the National Health Service. The government also faced pressure from soldiers returning from war and the expectations of the working class that the government deliver on their promises. To address the immediate housing needs, the government introduced a program of short-term repairs to existing properties and the rapid construction of prefabs. These prefabricated houses were factory-built, single-story bungalows that could be assembled quickly on site. Although controversial at the time, with concerns about their durability, they proved popular with some residents. The first prefabs were completed in June 1945, just weeks after the end of the war. Factories that had previously produced other products, such as aeroplanes, were converted to manufacture sections of these innovative new houses. The prefabs featured fully fitted kitchens and bathrooms, unlike traditional housing. Putting together the two-bedroom houses with plumbing and heating took at least 40 man-hours. In some cases, prisoners of war were used to help construct the concrete slabs on which sections of bungalows were erected. Once the sections arrived at the site, the prefabs could be completed very quickly. Despite constructing prefabs, the country still faced a severe housing shortage, leading to long waiting lists in urban areas. Local authorities took the lead in building homes for growing families. House building continued despite material shortages and harsh winters. New estates were built and established ones expanded. In Bristol alone, 43 families per week were moved into newly built homes at the peak of production in 1955. To meet the demand and reduce housing costs, a new form of construction known as precast reinforced concrete (PRC) was introduced. These homes were quick to assemble and required less skilled labour than traditional building methods. Different builders developed proprietary brands of PRC houses. While the construction of prefabs and PRC houses seemed like a solution to the housing crisis at the time, they later posed significant problems for tenants and councils across the country. The quality and durability of these houses became a concern as they aged. Issues such as structural defects and maintenance costs emerged, leading to challenges in providing safe and habitable homes for residents. Despite these challenges, by the end of the 1950s, 1.5 million homes had been completed, reducing some of the demand for housing. The percentage of people renting from local authorities increased to over a quarter of the population by 1961. In 1980, another housing crisis loomed on the horizon thanks to Margaret Thatcher's right-to-buy policy.